Jeffrey Lionel Dahmer was born on May 21, 1960 in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Jeffrey Dahmer was the first of two sons to Lionel Herbert Dahmer, a Marquette University chemistry student and later research chemist, and Joyce Annette Dahmer, who was a hypochondriac and suffered from depression. Jeffrey Dahmer was described as being an energetic and happy child. At elementary school, Dahmer was regarded as quiet and timid, but did have a small number of friends. The Dahmer family moved to Doylestown, Ohio in October 1966. When Jeffrey's mother Joyce gave birth in December, Dahmer was allowed to choose the name of his new baby brother. He chose the name David. From a young age, Jeffrey Dahmer had a fascination with dead animals. His fascination with dead animals may have begun at the age of 4, when Dahmer saw his father removing animal bones from beneath the family home. Jeffrey Dahmer enjoyed the sound that the bones made and became obsessed with animal bones, which he called his fiddlesticks. Dahmer would search beneath and around the family home for additional bones, and he would explore the bodies of live animals to discover where their bones were located. In May of 1968, the Dahmer family moved to Bath Township, Summit County, Ohio. The home stood on 1.5 acres of woodland with a small hut only a short walk from the house, where Dahmer began collecting large insects such as dragonflies and moths, and the skeletons of small animals such as chipmunks and squirrels. Some of these remains were preserved in jars of formaldehyde and stowed within the hut. When Jeffrey Dahmer reached puberty, he discovered he was gay, but did not tell his parents. This was also around the same time that Dahmer began fantasizing about dominating and controlling a completely submissive male partner, and his masturbatory fantasies gradually evolved to his focusing on chests and torsos. These fantasies gradually became entwined with dissection. When Jeffrey Dahmer was 16 years old, he conceived the fantasy of rendering unconscious a particular male jogger he found attractive, and then making sexual use of his body. On one occasion, Dahmer concealed himself in bushes with a baseball bat to lie in wait for this man. However, the jogger did not pass by on that particular day. Dahmer later admitted that this was his first attempt to attack and render an individual submissive to him. On June 18th in 1978, Jeffrey Dahmer picked up a hitchhiker, 19-year-old Stephen Mark Hicks. Dahmer lured the youth to his house on the pretext of drinking. Hicks, who had been hitchhiking to a rock concert in Chippewa Lake Park, Ohio, agreed to accompany Dahmer to his house upon the promise of a few beers with Dahmer, as he had the house to himself. According to Dahmer, the sight of the bare-chested Hicks standing at the roadside stirred his sexual feelings. Although, when Hicks began talking about girls, he knew any sexual passes he made would be rebuffed. After several hours of talking, drinking, and listening to music, Hicks wanted to leave, but Jeffrey Dahmer did not want him to leave. Dahmer bludgeoned Hicks with a 10-pound dumbbell as Hicks sat in a chair. When Hicks fell unconscious, Dahmer strangled him to death with the bar from the dumbbell, then stripped the clothes from Hicks' body before exploring his chest with his hands, then masturbating as he stood above the corpse. Hours later, Jeffrey Dahmer dragged the body to the basement. The following day, Jeffrey Dahmer dissected Hicks' body in his basement. He later buried the remains in a shallow grave in his backyard. Several weeks later, he unearthed the remains and stripped the flesh from the bones. He dissolved the flesh in acid before flushing the solution down the toilet. He crushed the bones with a sledgehammer and scattered them in the woodlands behind the family home. Jeffrey Dahmer enlisted in the United States Army and trained as a medical specialist at Fort Sam Houston in San Antonio, Texas. He was occasionally reprimanded for intoxication while stationed at Fort Sam Houston. He He eventually received an honorable discharge and left the Army. In 1981, Dahmer moved in with his grandmother in West Allis, Wisconsin. While growing up, Jeffrey Dahmer became void of being able to show any form of affection to any of his family members. Dahmer's grandmother was the only family member to whom Dahmer displayed any affection at all. The family hoped that her influence and change of location might persuade Jeffrey Dahmer to quit drinking, find employment, and live responsibly. Over the next few years, Jeffrey Dahmer's thirst for murder would again become a reality. He would continue to murder young men and dispose of them at his grandmother's residence. In January 1985, Jeffrey Dahmer was hired as a mixer at the Milwaukee Ambrosia chocolate factory. In late 1988, Jeffrey Dahmer's grandmother asked him to move out. She had grown tired of his drinking, as well as him bringing young men to the house. She had grown tired of the foul smells occasionally emanating from both the basement and the garage. Little did she know that these were the places Jeffrey Dahmer would dispose of his victims, and that smell was the smell of death and decay. One of Dahmer's victims, his fifth murder, was a mixed-race 24-year-old aspiring model named Anthony Sears, whom Dahmer met at a gay bar on March 25, 1989. Jeffrey Dahmer lured Sears to his grandmother's home, where their pair engaged in oral sex before Dahmer drugged and strangled Sears. The following morning, Dahmer placed the deceased Anthony Sears in his grandmother's bathtub, where he decapitated the body. Dahmer stripped the flesh from the body and pulverized the bones, which he disposed of in the trash. Jeffrey Dahmer found Anthony Sears exceptionally attractive, and as a trophy, he preserved Sears' head and genitalia in acetone and stored them in a wooden box, which he later placed in his work locker. On May 14, 1990, Jeffrey Dahmer moved out of his grandmother's house and into 924 North 25th Street, apartment 213, taking Anthony Sears' mummified head and genitals with him. Within 1 week of moving into his new apartment, Jeffrey Dahmer would kill his sixth victim, a 32-year-old male prostitute named Raymond Smith. Dahmer lured the man to his apartment with the promise of $50 for sex. Dahmer had given Raymond Smith a drink laced with 7 sleeping pills, then manually strangled him. The following day, Dahmer went out and purchased a Polaroid camera, all for the reason of taking several pictures of Smith's body in suggestive positions before dismembering him in the bathroom. Dahmer boiled the man's legs, arms, and pelvis in a steel kettle with Soilax, which allowed him to rinse the bones in his sink. Dahmer saved the skull and dissolved the remainder of Smith's skeletal remains in a container filled with acid. Dahmer later spray-painted Smith's skull, which he placed alongside the skull of Sears upon a black towel inside a metal filing cabinet. Jeffrey Dahmer's murderous tendencies continued to grow. At one point, he met 22-year-old Chicago native Ernest Miller and invited him back to his apartment. After giving Miller a drink laced in sleeping pills, Dahmer slashed the man's carotid artery. Ernest Miller died within minutes. Jeffrey Dahmer then posed the nude body of Miller for various suggestive Polaroid photographs before placing the body in his bathtub for dismemberment. Dahmer repeatedly kissed and talked to the severed head while he dismembered the remainder of the body. Dahmer would then wrap Miller's heart, liver, biceps, and portions of flesh from his legs in plastic bags and place them in the freezer for later consumption. On April 7th in 1991, Jeffrey Dahmer encountered a 19-year-old named Errol Lindsay who was heterosexual. Dahmer was still able to lure Lindsay to his apartment where he was drugged. While unconscious, Jeffrey Dahmer drilled a hole into Errol Lindsay's skull, and Dahmer injected hydrochloric acid with a baster into the hole. Jeffrey Dahmer had conceived the hole drilling experiment in hopes of inducing a permanent, unresistant, submissive state. He wanted an obedient slave to attend to his disturbing sexual needs and had hopes of creating a sexual zombie that would only live to feed his sick and twisted ways. According to Dahmer, Lindsay would eventually wake up after this experiment, saying, "I have a headache. What time is it?" Dahmer responded to Lindsay by drugging him, then strangling him. He decapitated Lindsay and retained the skull. He then flayed Lindsay's body, placing the man's skin in a solution of cold water and salt for several weeks in the hopes of permanently retaining it. Lindsay's skin had become too frayed and brittle, and Dahmer disposed of it. On May 26, 1991, in what would become one of the most famously known incidents of the case, Jeffrey Dahmer encountered a 14-year-old teenager named Canarac Synthesymphone. Dahmer approached the teenager with an offer of money to accompany him to his apartment to pose for Polaroid pictures. According to Jeffrey Dahmer, Canarac was initially reluctant to the proposal, but changed his mind and accompanied him to his apartment, where he posed for 2 pictures in his underwear before Dahmer drugged him and performed oral sex on him. Jeffrey Dahmer believed that while leading the young man into his bedroom, Canarac may have seen the body of Tony Hughes, whom Dahmer had killed 3 days earlier, laying naked on the floor. Yet the young man did not react to seeing a bloated corpse, most likely because of the effect of the sleeping pills that Dahmer had given him earlier. While unconscious, Jeffrey Dahmer drilled a single narrow hole into the crown of Canarac's skull, through which he injected hydrochloric acid into the frontal lobe. While laying alongside the unconscious Canarac, Dahmer drank several beers before briefly falling asleep, then leaving his apartment to drink at a bar and purchase more alcohol. In the early morning of May 27th, Jeffrey Dahmer returned to his apartment to discover Canarac sitting naked on the corner, talking in Lao, with 3 distressed young women standing near him. Dahmer approached the women and told them that Canarac was his friend and attempted to lead him to his apartment by the arm. The 3 women dissuaded Dahmer by telling him that they had called 911. Milwaukee police officers arrived at the scene. During the situation, Jeffrey Dahmer's demeanor was calm and relaxed. He told the police officers that Canarac was his 19-year-old boyfriend and that he had drunk too much following a quarrel and that he frequently behaved in this manner while intoxicated. Dahmer added that his lover consumed Jack Daniel's whiskey all evening. The 3 women tried to speak to police officers over the incident, but were told not to interfere with the situation. 3 members of the Milwaukee Fire Department arrived at the scene and provided a yellow blanket for the police officers to cover the still nude young man. One of the 3 believed Canarac needed treatment, but the police officers directed the fire department personnel to leave. Shortly thereafter, Officer Richard Perubkin arrived at the scene. The 3 officers escorted Jeffrey Dahmer and Canarac to Dahmer's apartment. Dahmer repeatedly expressed his appreciation of the police and how crime was destroying the neighborhood. He did this to try and spark a friendly rapport with the officers. Inside the apartment, Dahmer showed the police officers 2 semi-nude Polaroids he had taken of the youth the previous evening. Dahmer did this in an effort to verify his claim that he and Canarac were lovers, and that this was nothing more than just a quarrel between the 2. Officer Joseph Gabrish later stated that he noted a strange scent reminiscent of excrement inside the apartment. This odor emanated from the decomposing body of Tony Hughes. One of the police officers even peeked his head around the bedroom, but really didn't take a good look. The police officers then left Jeffrey Dahmer's apartment, with their parting words being, "Take good care of Canarac." Jeffrey Dahmer took care of him all right, but not in a good way. Jeffrey Dahmer once again injected hydrochloric acid into Canarac's brain, and this second injection proved fatal. Canarac was dead. The next day, Jeffrey Dahmer took a day off from work and spent the whole day dismembering the bodies of Canarac and Hughes. As with his previous victims, Jeffrey Dahmer kept both victims' skulls. Jeffrey Dahmer would continue to go on with his murderous ways. He would continue to lure unsuspecting victims into his apartment and murder them. saving parts of each victim for trophies and consumption. It wasn't until July 22nd, 1991, that Jeffrey Dahmer would finally be caught, and his trail of madness would finally be exposed to the public. On that day, Jeffrey Dahmer approached 3 men with an offer of $100 to accompany him to his apartment to pose for nude photographs, drink beer, and simply keep him company. Of the 3 men, 32-year-old Tracy Edwards agreed to accompany Dahmer to his apartment. Upon entering Jeffrey Dahmer's apartment, Tracy Edwards could smell a foul odor. Jeffrey Dahmer asked the man to view his tropical fish, whereupon Dahmer placed a handcuff upon the man's wrists. When Tracy Edwards asked what's happening, Jeffrey Dahmer unsuccessfully attempted to cuff his wrists together. He then told Edwards to accompany him to the bedroom. While inside the bedroom, Tracy Edwards noted nude male posters on the wall and a videotape of The Exorcist III playing. Dahmer pulled out a knife and told Tracy Edwards he intended to take nude photos of him. In an attempt to play Jeffrey Dahmer's game, Tracy Edwards unbuttoned his shirt, saying he would only allow him to do so if he would remove the handcuffs and put the knife away. Jeffrey Dahmer simply turned his attention towards The Exorcist III, the William Peter Blatty movie that was showing on the television. Edwards observed Dahmer rocking back and forth and chanting before turning his attention back to him. He placed his head on Edwards' chest, listening to his heartbeat, pressing the knife against Edwards. Jeffrey Dahmer told Tracy Edwards he intended to eat his heart. But Tracy Edwards repeatedly told Dahmer that he was his friend and that he was not going to run away. Edwards had decided he was going to either jump from a window and run through the unlocked front door upon the next available opportunity. Edwards told Dahmer that he needed to use the bathroom and asked if he could sit in the living room where the air conditioning was. Dahmer agreed. While sitting inside the living room, Edwards waited until he observed Dahmer have a momentary lapse of concentration before requesting to use the bathroom again. When Edwards rose from the couch, he punched Jeffrey Dahmer in the face, knocking him down, and ran out the front door. Edward flagged down 2 Milwaukee police officers, Robert Routh and Rolf Mueller. The officers noted that Edwards had handcuffs still attached to his wrists. Edwards told the officers that a freak had placed the handcuffs on him. Edwards agreed to accompany the officers to Dahmer's apartment, the same place where Edwards had spent the previous 5 hours before escaping. When the officers and Edwards arrived at apartment 213, Jeffrey Dahmer invited them inside. Dahmer admitted to police that he had placed the handcuffs on Edwards and offered no explanation as to why he had done so. Edwards told the officers that Dahmer also pulled a large knife on him and that this had happened in the bedroom. Dahmer told one of the officers, Rolf Mueller, that the key to the handcuffs was in his bedside dresser. As Mueller entered the bedroom, Dahmer attempted to pass Mueller to retrieve the key himself, but Rolf informed Dahmer to back off. In the bedroom, Mueller noted that there was a large knife beneath the bed. He also spotted an open dresser drawer which contained a large amount of Polaroid pictures. Mueller was shocked. Many of the Polaroid pictures were of human bodies in various stages of dismemberment. Mueller noted that decor indicated that they had been taken in the same apartment in which they were standing. Mueller walked into the living room to show them to his partner, uttering the words, "These are for real." When Dahmer saw that Mueller was holding several of his Polaroids, Dahmer fought with the officers in an attempt to resist arrest. The officers quickly overpowered him, cuffed his hands, and called a second squad car for backup. The monster had finally been caught. Mueller continued to search the apartment. He opened the refrigerator to reveal the freshly severed head of a black male on the bottom shelf. As Dahmer lay handcuffed on the floor, he turned his head towards the police officers and muttered the words, "For what I did, I should be dead." The Milwaukee Police Criminal Investigation Bureau conducted a more detailed search of the apartment. They would discover a total of 4 severed heads in Dahmer's kitchen, a total of 7 skulls, some of them painted, some of them bleached, were found in Dahmer's bedroom and inside the closet. Investigators also discovered a tray of collected blood at the bottom of Dahmer's refrigerator, plus 2 human hearts and a portion of arm muscle, each wrapped inside plastic bags upon the shelves. In Dahmer's freezer, investigators discovered an entire torso, plus a bag of human organs and flesh stuck to the ice at the bottom. Investigators also discovered 2 entire skeletons, a pair of severed hands, 2 severed and preserved penises, a mummified scalp, and in a 57-gallon drum, 3 further dismembered torsos dissolving in acid solution. A total of 74 Polaroid pictures detailed the dismemberment of Dahmer's victims were also found. A chief medical examiner later stated, "It was more like dismantling someone's museum than an actual crime scene." Over the following 2 weeks, Detective Patrick Kennedy and later Detective Dennis Murphy conducted over 60 hours of numerous interviews with Jeffrey Dahmer. Dahmer waived his right to have a lawyer present throughout his interrogations, adding he wished to confess all as he had created this horror, and it only makes sense I do everything to put an end to it. Jeffrey Dahmer admitted to having murdered 16 young men in Wisconsin since 1987. Almost all of the murders Dahmer committed involved a ritual of posing the victim's body in suggestive positions, typically with the chest thrust outwards prior to dismemberment. Dahmer also admitted to engaging in necrophilia with several of his victims' bodies, including performing sexual acts with their internal organs as he dismembered their bodies in his bathtub. Dahmer would remove their internal organs first, then suspended the torso so blood drained into his bathtub before dicing any organs and paring the flesh from the body. The bones he wished to dispose of were pulverized or acidified with Soilex and bleach solutions used to aid in the preservations of the skeletons and skulls he wished to keep. Dahmer confessed to having consumed the hearts, liver, biceps, and thighs of 3 victims he had killed, and to having retained the flesh and organs of other victims for intended consumption. Dahmer would tenderize the body parts he intended to consume prior to preparing meals flavored with various condiments. Jeffrey Dahmer would state that his reasons for consuming his victims was due to curiosity. Dahmer would say, "I suppose, in an odd way, it made me feel they were even a more permanent part of me." When asked as if to why he had preserved a total of 7 skulls and the entire skeletons of 2 victims, Dahmer stated that he had been in the process of constructing a private altar of victims' skulls, which he had intended to display on the black table located in his living room and upon which he had photographed the bodies of many of his victims. Jeffrey Dahmer drew out a picture depicting the private altar he had planned to create. This display of skulls was to be adorned at each side with the complete skeletons of Miller and Lacey. The 4 severed heads found in his kitchen were to have all flesh removed and used in this altar, as was the skull of at least 1 future victim. Incense sticks were to be placed at each end of the black table, above which Dahmer intended to place a large blue lamp with extended blue globe lights. The entire construction was to be placed before a window covered with a black opaque shower curtain, in front of which Dahmer intended to sit in a black leather chair. On January 30th, 1992, Jeffrey Dahmer's trial began. He was tried in Milwaukee for 15 counts of first-degree murder. Dahmer pleaded guilty, but insane, to 15 counts of murder. By pleading guilty, Dahmer had waived his rights to a trial to establish guilt, as defined in Wisconsin law. The trial lasted 2 weeks. On February 15, 1992, Jeffrey Dahmer was ruled to be sane and not suffering from a mental disorder at the time of each of the 15 murders. Dahmer was then sentenced to life in prison plus 10 years upon the first 2 counts. The remaining 13 counts carried a mandatory sentence of life imprisonment plus 70 years. Jeffrey Dahmer said, "I know my time in prison will be terrible, but I deserve whatever I get because of what I have done." On the morning of November 28, 1994, Jeffrey Dahmer would eventually get what he said he deserved. That morning, Jeffrey Dahmer left his cell to conduct his assignment work details. Accompanying him were 2 fellow inmates, Jesse Anderson and Christopher Scarver. The 3 inmates were left unsupervised in the shower of the prison gym for approximately 20 minutes. At approximately 8:10 a.m., Dahmer was discovered on the floor of the bathrooms of the gym. Jeffrey Dahmer had been severely bludgeoned about the head and face with a 20-inch metal bar. His head had also been repeatedly struck against the wall in the assault. Dahmer was rushed to a nearby hospital and pronounced dead 1 hour later. The second inmate, Jesse Anderson, had been beaten with the same instrument and died 2 days later. Christopher Scarver, who was serving a life sentence for a murder committed in 1990, informed authorities he had first attacked Dahmer with a metal bar as Dahmer was cleaning a staff locker room before attacking Anderson as Anderson cleaned an inmate locker room. Scarver, who was thought to be schizophrenic, returned to his cell and informed the prison guard, "God told me to do it. Jesse Anderson and Jeffrey Dahmer are dead." According to Scarver, Jeffrey Dahmer did not yell or make any noise as he was attacked. Jeffrey Dahmer's mother, Joyce Flint, upon learning of his death, responded angrily to the media. "Now is everybody happy? Now that he's bludgeoned to death? Is that good enough for everyone?" Jeffrey Dahmer killed 17 young men between 1978 and 1991. He has become one of the most known serial killers of all time. There have been countless movies, books, and documentaries about him. One has to wonder how such heinous crimes were able to go for so long undetected inside of a small Milwaukee apartment in an urban setting. It makes one wonder if we really do know our neighbors.